Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, and so we have another Khyber Shards Answers. This is the last solo one for a while. It's the end of the holiday season here, and travel and family things still making scheduling a little bit tricky as we round out Christmas travels and go into New Year's. So starting next week, we should be back to our regular schedule of having one of the players on here to answer questions. But for today, we're going to talk a little bit about things that inspire me as a DM, things that have helped me be a better DM, and then do a little bit of a NPC Q&A to wrap up the year. So to start off, I wanted to just talk through a few things that I think have made me a better game master over the course of my time playing tabletop RPGs. Other than, like, this is not like tips and tricks, it's just things in my life that have made me better at this. First thing is books. Just reading good fiction makes such a huge difference in your world building and in your ability to be a good storyteller. And you can really tell a lot of the tone that a GM has by the kind of fiction that they like. So Lord of the Rings obviously is top of my fantasy list, really high on my fiction list, period, in terms of my favorite books. Anyone who knows me knows that. So that comes as no surprise. But in terms of me as a storyteller, what I have found is that makes me really, really like the notion of languages in a world. And I think that's probably why I tend to try really hard to do linguistic voices, accented voices where I'm able to. But also, I think it generally affects the tone of my stories. I'm an optimist in my storytelling. I'm not always in my analysis of the real world, but in terms of my storytelling, I'm very much an optimist. Stories I'm telling tend to be one in which there is evil and it can be triumphed over, not freely, not without cost, but I tend to lean in the bittersweet paradigm. I tend to lean towards the sweet. I tend to view the fantasy world as more optimistic because for me, it's an escape. Why would I want my fantasy world to reflect any of the bleakness I see in this very broken world that we inhabit? J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis both get accused of being escapist fantasy, and C.S. Lewis famously said, of course, what man in jail would not think of escape? Speaking of the difficulties of life and the escape that good fiction provides. And so I find RPGs to be that way. They're escapism for me. And so I naturally want them to be nicer places than the world I inhabit. My RPGs tend to be, at least on some level, what I wish the world could be like, rather than what it is. Which is, again, Tolkien versus, say, George R.R. Martin. George R.R. Martin is a fantastic world builder and a good storyteller, but his worldview is just a bummer to me. It kind of implies that everyone who thinks idealistically, everyone who thinks heroically, put them up against the wall and they'll be revealed as either a fool or actually a scoundrel. Whereas I tend to like, Tolkien's view of take a hobbit, the least epically heroic culture you could encounter, put them up against a wall with an understanding of the stakes, and they'll show themselves to be a hero. I like that a little bit better. So that tends to affect the tone of my stories, and makes me, that kind of fiction has a huge impact on me as a game master. In terms of other fiction that has played a big role in the way that I run games, Dune is another big one. I tend to like games with factions and games with some sort of political element to them, and Dune's a big influence for me there because, of course, Dune is kind of a political thriller in a lot of senses, and the feudal machinations of the great houses. I just love that. Also, just about any fantasy world I create has some sort of equivalent of the Fremen in it, because the culture is just amazing to me. In Eberron Renewed, I played a drow, and a lot of the ways that I thought through him thinking about the world were drawing elements out of the Fremen culture, although in a very different context, for obvious reasons if you've listened to that podcast. Another one less foundational to sci-fi and fantasy, KJ Parker. KJ Parker has an interesting take on the world. It's kind of a mirror to George R.R. Martin, because most of KJ Parker's protagonists are scoundrels. And the story that he tells seems to be more often that take a scoundrel, put them up against the wall, and the hero will come out. It's the Han Solo idea, right? You have a guy who's ultimately selfish and out for himself, but put him in the circumstance where he has to pick between right and wrong, and he picks right. And that's KJ Parker stuff. KJ Parker is also absolutely, without a doubt, the best describer of combat in fiction. If you want to be better at describing combat in your games, read Sharps by KJ Parker, which is just a great book anyway, but that book is fabulous at describing sword combat, and really any kind of armed combat. So that's a big influence there. Although a lot of our characters, other than Pog, aren't weapon focused, and even the other ones that are, Shade carries a weapon, but Shade uses her mark as often as she does weapon attacks. So it doesn't show up in Khyber Shards quite as much. But Sharps is a fabulous book, but it's also just really good for learning to describe armed combat. Another thing that I found that's a little bit more practically useful, other than just saying read more books, is watching television and movies with an ear out for voices. And I don't just mean accents. Not everyone can do accents. There's a little bit of just a practice to it, and there's a little bit of a natural talent to it. Not everyone's good at accents, and you don't need to be good at accents to be a good GM, because there's so many things you can do vocally to make a character distinct without them needing to have some kind of special accent. I think a really great example of this in recent history is Vincent D'Onofrio as the Kingpin in the Netflix Daredevil series, because I can't do that voice. It's a great voice. I can't do that voice because there's not nearly enough bass to me to get to that level of voice. But there is an intensity, as if everything is spoken through clenched teeth, because he's holding back this ocean of rage within himself that makes the voice tell you about the character. And I can do that even if I can't do an imitation. So when you talk about doing voices for your characters, I'm not talking about doing impressions, although you certainly can. And I do impressions for some things. There are a couple of my characters. Kiris Selshadra in Khyber Shards is based on a character from Silicon Valley in terms of the voice, like just the vocal pattern. It's not exactly an impression, but again, it's taking that vocal pattern because it implies this methodical thing and also a general lack of social skill in the character. and I like that a lot. So there's a lot of that I do when I'm watching TV or films or listening to audiobooks or other podcasts where I'm listening to voices and thinking, oh, that's a good voice, regardless of whether or not it's an accent I can do. Because I do a few accents well, and I do a few accents kind of middling, and then I do a lot of accents very badly, and so I generally don't. But accents are just part of it. If you can do accents, fabulous. If you don't do accents, you don't care about doing accents, then don't worry about doing accents. It's not what makes you a great DM. And it's not what makes great voice work as a DM. What makes great voice work as a DM is that the voice tells you something about the character while you are listening to that voice, regardless of your ability to do accents. And then the last thing that is usually a big inspiration for me as a DM is other RPG books. I've actually run a relatively small number of RPGs compared to the number of RPG books that I've read and owned. I've never run Blades in the Dark, although I'm using a lot of Blades in the Dark ideas in Khyber Shards. Reading that book didn't necessarily make me want to run Blades in the Dark, although I'd totally play it in Game of Blades in the Dark. But what it did make me better at running Dungeons & Dragons. 7th Sea, the Dune RPG, Fantasy Age. I've run Fantasy Age, but still, I would argue that I've abandoned it since then because it just wasn't doing quite what my group wanted. But reading it and the ideas in it, I've kept a couple of the books. I'm keeping a couple of the books because they have ideas in them that make me a better dungeon master. And a great resource for that kind of thing is when you're at a used bookstore, just look in their RPG section, and if they've got a good deal on the core book for a system you haven't played, pick it up. You don't have to want to play it for it to be useful. There's great advice and great ideas of systems in other books. And so my RPG book collection is only maybe a third games I run with any regularity, but all of it has been useful in making me better at GMing. Probably the thing I'm weakest at, and the thing I'm working the hardest on, and I've mentioned this in a couple of places, is describing more dramatically. And in the next couple of episodes, hopefully you'll be able to tell that I have been working on that. And so you find everything you got to work on, but the things that you're drawing on from the outside and framing them into how is this storytelling that I'm observing out here going to play out at my table. And anytime I watch a movie, watch a TV show, there's some part of me that's thinking, what is this in D&D? My wife and I will occasionally do this just for amusement, but we were watching the Wheel of Time series that came out on Amazon, and a bit into it, we started describing it as a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that had gone off the rails because, Matt and Rand and Egwene and Perrin are your typical party. We started in a bar. We're first level adventurers, and we're off on a quest following the wizard and the knight. And then in no time flat, we do something really stupid and we lose our guides and we get split up and it's all over the place. And so the DM in desperation starts just throwing in more powerful NPCs to help pull them back together. So we get their druid friend in, and then we get more wizards, and this bard shows up to rescue them, and on and on and on. And so, that was just funny, but also it was thinking through, okay, how do you take this story and frame this as an RPG? Because that's really what tabletop RPGs began as. It was this desire to live in the kind of story that you've always read and watched. Khyber Shards is heavily influenced by X-Men. If we didn't like X-Men and enjoy the idea of living in that kind of story, it'd be a bad inspiration for it. So my way of improving myself as a as a game master and making myself better at running games and telling stories with my players. And that's another important thing, is I always think of it that way. I don't think of myself as the storyteller. Some games will describe the game master role as the storyteller, but all of us are telling the story. And if you think I've got control of the story at most given times during Khyber Shards, you have not been paying close attention. One of the ways I've made myself better at telling a story with my players is to take the fiction that I'm enjoying at any given time and reframe it in my mind. How does this play out on the table? So just some thoughts on stuff that tends to inspire me as a GM. All right, on to listener questions. I opened this up to questions for NPCs. We hadn't done one of those in a bit and got a few. So the first round is for Arlo. Mia asks, Arlo, what was it like to intentionally show your mark to the others? Well, the truth is, to be told, it was rather uncomfortable. I understand the well-meaningness behind what they're saying. Oh, I don't have to hide it, and I can be proud of it, and that sort of thing. And maybe one day I'll feel that way. And I understand how they have come to feel that way, perhaps. But for me, feeling it on my face, as I do all the time, is a constant reminder of the wreckage of my life. Everything I built and that my family built, completely in ruins. Because of this. And it's not a joy to me. And I consider myself extremely lucky that my abilities allow me to mask its presence and to walk around as if it were not there, or at least to not have to be reminded by the way people look at me that it's there. It does some interesting things, and I have never been one to dwell on the past. I will not wallow in my sorrows. But if I could go back and make it not happen and to not be marked, yes, in a heartbeat. But I can't. It's not something I can control, so what's the good? But I don't like to be reminded of it by watching people stare at it just above my eyeline. Laura also asks Arlo a question. Laura's question is the school what you expected it to be? Specifically, the people at the school. Well, they're a cagey lot. I am used to being among other academics. And as best I can tell, none of them are. Not to say unintelligent, that's not at all what I mean, that's not the same thing. But they're not academics. I am the only academic. Even Thora is not an academic. So that is a bit jarring, and presumably through hard-won experience, they are slow to let one in, if you know what I mean. So it's difficult. Also, there are these references to jobs that result in strange creatures being brought back to the manor. So I am somewhat uncertain what else is going on here. And I'm interested to know, and perhaps I'm a bit concerned to know. Our next question is for Forge. Mia asks, how does it feel to be a war forged and with an aberrant mark? That is a difficult question. Analyzing one's self-awareness is not easy. It would be strange, of course, for you to try and answer the question, how does it feel to be a human? As to this, I do not exactly understand what this is. The others make much of it and say that the outside world will make much of it, and very likely they say it is the reason that I was imprisoned in the way that I was. I do not completely understand it, nor why my kind must be called war forged, as if that were our only purpose. A very sad idea to me, that my only purpose was war. I create when I may. I love to. It is joy to feel the metal respond, to see the magic take in an item. And the thought that my only purpose would be violence is disconcerting to me. But I do not yet know what it means to be a warforged or to have an aberrant mark. And from the way that I hear these things talked about, I am not sure that I wish to find out. I consider myself fortunate in my rescuers, and perhaps I will remain quietly at this place as long as I can. Laura asks, Thora, what kind of pet would you like Pog and Esri to get? How about an ordinary mundane puppy? Or a goldfish? I don't object to a pet. My objection is very much to the fact that that thing, if it is allowed to remain at school, has a very high potential of getting loose and killing someone. And considering that there will be children here, it seems very likely that one of them will be killed. I'm perfectly happy for them to get a pet. But get me one. Show me a pet that's not in any way a danger to the children. That's the kind I'm after. Frankly, it doesn't seem like that big of a limitation, but apparently so. Laura asks, Puzzle Dust, what do you do in your chill time? I don't understand that question. My chill time is simply to be what I am. Chill time. People in this world are very, very strange. They seem to take time off from fulfilling their primary function. My function is to play my role in the story, and were I to take time off from that, what am I taking time off from being what I am? I do not understand this mortal idea of chill time. It is rather disagreeable, if you ask me. Rather an alarming concept, to cease to be what you are for any amount of time. But it is apparently the thing that mortals do, so I have begun attempting to learn chess. I don't see the purpose, but it seems to be the thing that is expected of people in this world. So here I am. Mia asks, Donabella, what is your hesitation in joining the school? Okay, I mean, here's the thing. I I like them quite a lot. Okay, they're really cool people and they do really cool things. But it seems really intense to them that they have marks and that I have a mark. And I kind of like just being a kid. And I think my mark's really cool. And I like using it, and it's fun to practice. And all my friends think it's pretty cool. And that's another thing. It seemed like from the way they were talking that they wouldn't let many of my friends come to the school, like to visit and hang out. And that, I don't like that at all. I mean, Kedrick and Ilya and Levexi and Bajak don't care that I have a mark, and I don't care that they don't have marks. So I don't see why they can't come and hang out. Like, I don't just want to be around people like me. If I just wanted to be around people like me, I wouldn't hang out with Levexi. Levexi is awesome, and she's nothing like me. And Ilya is awesome, and she's nothing like me. And I don't care that Bajak's dad has a mark. Like, it has a regular dragon mark, so why should it matter that I have one of these dragon marks? And it just doesn't seem fair that my friends can't come and hang out at the school. That's my problem with the whole idea. And I don't know if that was really a rule, but the way they talked about it made it kind of sound like it was, and I don't like that very much at all. But I mean, otherwise, it seems pretty cool, and learning to use my mark would be good. And I've never really been to school, and so Mom says that would be good to go to school. There aren't a lot of opportunities for me to do that, and this is a good one. And I could like broaden myself and learn a lot of important things and have a good life experience, and that's, you know, I guess that's important. It just, I like who I am, and I like who my friends are, and I don't really want this to change who my friends can be, and I don't really want this to change who I am. And so far, it doesn't really seem like it has, but I don't know. It seemed like I don't just want to be the girl with the mark. That's a cool book name, though. Girl with the Mark would be a really good book. I would read that book, but I don't want to be just the girl with the mark. I like being, you know, I like being me. So that's kind of the thing I'm worried about. But if my friends could come visit, then yeah, I mean, okay, it would be cool. So I'll see. Mom says we'll give it a chance. So I guess we'll give it a chance. But she says I don't have to stay if I don't like it. So that's okay. I can try it. Bigger things have changed before. When we moved here, it was a big change, and we tried it, and you know what? It turned out okay. I didn't think it would. I didn't think it would, but it turned out pretty good. And I have friends now, and you know, it's good. So we'll try it. We'll try it, and maybe it will turn out good. I hope so. And our last question comes from Laura. Laura asks, Tommel, of course, what fun things did you do as a kid? You know, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it anymore. It was a long time ago, and it was before I changed. And before I changed again. I'm a different person than I was back then. But I mean, if you want to just dig up trivia, I guess I used to go hawking with my friends. We'd take falcons and hawks out and go hunting. That was pretty excellent. My dad had a hawk that was one of the great lineages. It was descended from one of the ancient elven druids of the giant rebellion, And man, that hawk could hunt. It was amazing to watch it go. You could see it thinking. So staying out all day in the fields, watching the hawks, that was pretty awesome. We'd make bets. I liked that. And watching the warriors compete at Buzkashi on their horses. Buzkashi is a Valinor game in which an animal carcass from a hunt is used as the goal in a race in which teams of mounted warriors try to seize the animal and carry it across their opponent's goal line. It's pretty impressive. It's chaotic, but it really shows who's strongest and who's the best horseman. And that's the really key thing, is it isn't just about physical strength. It's about being one with your horse. I miss horses. If I'm being honest about my childhood, I miss horses. But there are more important things to do now. And looking back is just a distraction from looking ahead, from focusing on what's coming and being prepared for it. So I don't waste a lot of time there anymore. Okay. Well, that's all of our questions and all of our NPC Q&A for this week. Thank you all so much. Thank you for your patience and flexibility, as our KSA schedule has been kind of topsy-turvy from what it usually is. We'll get back on the regular rotation of having the players on to answer your questions starting next week. I'm not sure who it will be yet, but we'll get one of them on next week to answer questions about the last several episodes that we've had over the holiday. And man, we're really excited to show you what we've got in the new year, in our second year of Khyber Shards. We did another recording last night, and man, it was a really good night of D&D, and I can't wait for you to see it. So over the next few weeks, get into the next chapter, and man, it's a doozy. I can't wait. New episodes of Khyber Shards drop every Monday. Khyber Shards Answers every Friday. You can submit questions for Khyber Shards Answers in comments below, as well as over on our Discord. Links to our Discord and to all of our social media and our merch store are in the description down below. And until next time, this has been Khyber Shards. Thanks for rolling with us.